Greetings, this is Amy Wentley with Chai Knuckles Knitting. This is BSJ Episode 1, Casting On, Placing Markers, and Working Decreases. This is the first of several videos in a special series on Elizabeth Zimmerman's Baby Surprise Jacket. I'm making these videos for my students in a class I am teaching at a local yarn store. This video will cover how to cast on for the project, how to place markers, and how to work decreases for the beginning of the project, and I will also offer some hints and tips for the pattern. I'm working with a bulky yarn with large needles for demonstration purposes. The number of stitches I'm working on will vary from yours because my gauge is very different. Okay, so you are about to begin your project and you will need to cast on a number of stitches. So before we get started, I want to go over some hints and tips for the pattern. Okay, the first hint I have for you is if you choose to do the long tail cast on, you can use 2 balls of yarn or both ends of the yarn that you have to take the guesswork out of how long your tail should be. If you want more information on how to do that, you can check out a video on my website. You can see the link down here at the bottom of the screen. And then I will also list this in the video description. That'll give you hints on how to do the long tail cast on, and there are also some other cast on videos available there if you're interested in viewing those. One hint I have as you cast on, since you're going to be doing so many stitches, is to mark every 20 stitches as you cast on to help with counting, and you'll remove these after you're done casting on. So this is an example here. For my size, I needed to cast on 66 stitches. So I have 20, 40, 66 stitches that I cast on. And these just help me count so I don't have to keep counting from the beginning. Just saves me a little work, and I like that. Okay, also I suggest that you keep good track of which row you are on. And be aware, since this is in garter stitch, 2 rows are going to equal 1 ridge on your sweater. I suggest that you either use something like Knit Companion or a piece of paper with the rows written on them, or the pattern next to you, just to be able to tick off where you are in the project. If you're going to be adding stripes, add a new color on the the right side of the garment. Otherwise the purl bumps will show. And you can either use the Weave and Stevens method that I have linked here, or you can check out my website for a link to how to deal with stripes. And I will put that in the description also. I suggest also hanging a flashy marker on the right side, especially at the beginning of the project, so you can tell the difference between the front and the back of the garment. That's so much easier to keep track of where you are. And remember that increases and decreases only happen on the right side or the public side of the garment. You can place a marker in the exact middle of the garment. The whole garment is symmetrical, so it's nice to have it broken up equally. So what I would normally do is, if I have 66 stitches here that I cast on, I would, at 33, place a marker. So this is 20, this is 20, and then 13 in will be 33. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So right there, I will place a marker in the middle, and that will remind me that that's the middle of the garment, and whatever I have going on one side will be equal on the other side. It's just a little tip, kind of helps keep you aware of where you are at any one time. Except when you are working on the diaper flap, don't slip the first stitch of every row. The reason for this is it gives you a better edge so that when you go to work the shoulder seams, which are the only seams that you have to do, that you'll have a stronger seam. When you slip that first stitch, it gives you 1 stitch for every 2 rows, and it's not quite as strong of a seam. The only time you really slip a first stitch on any row is if you're going to have a raw edge that shows. In this sweater, the only raw edges that are going to show that aren't bound off stitches are the ones along the neckline. If these bother you, you can choose to slip the first stitch of each row after you bind off for the notches at the neck. In the pattern for the baby sizes starts around row 73. You can refer to the Craft Yarn Council site for sizing standards. They have a list of baby sizes and children's sizes that might help you figure out what size you'd like to work the sweater in. So those are my hints and tips. And so you have just worked, you've just cast on your stitches to begin the sweater. And here's your working yarn. You placed a unique marker right at the middle, and now you can go ahead and you can take off your counting markers. Okay, those are these extra ones that I put at every 20 stitches. You want to get rid of these because you're going to be using markers and for the pattern, and you want to know which ones those are, and these are just not necessary right now. So one of the first things the instructions for the pattern say is that you should, in my version it says mark stitch 15 and stitch 52. Yours might be something like stitch 34 and 105. Read your pattern, it'll tell you which. But what you want to do is you want to find two unique markers, and I'm going to use bright red here, and you are going to want to actually slip these markers over the stitch, not next to the stitch, but actually over the stitch. So I'm going to start here, and mine are supposed to be at stitch 15 and 52. So I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. So 15 is the first one, and I've got it isolated here. And I can get my camera a little closer for you. So that's stitch 15, and I'm going to take my marker and I'm actually going to loop it around the back and hang it off this stitch. So it's not going to be hanging on the wire, it's going to be hanging on the stitch. And this is now called the marked stitch. So that's stitch 15, and then it also told me to do stitch 52. So that's going to be, this is 15, 16, 17, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32, 34, 36, 38, 40, 42, 44, 46, 48, 50, 52. So this is stitch number 52 for me. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to take this marker and take it around the back, bring it to the front, and lock it. This actually should be the 15th stitch from the other direction. Let's make sure it is. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. So the entire piece now is symmetrical. Stitch 15, stitch 52, and this is the stitch in the middle. And so these red stitches now are called the mark stitches. Now one thing about markers is these are the big plastic locking markers, and they're great for a bulky yarn like this. If you are using a fingering weight yarn, which the pattern calls for, you're going to want to use a smaller kind of marker, something like this, thin, so that you don't distort your yarn. If you use a big marker like this on fingering weight yarn, it's going to kind of stretches the stitches around it, and it's just better to use a smaller stitch. Okay, the other thing I suggested in my hints is when we get started, this first row is going to be our right side row. So we're going to want to work 2 rows, and then we are going to mark the front of our garment so that we can tell the difference. So let's get started with the first row, and we will learn the first decrease. Okay, so the next step in my pattern says I'm supposed to knit 13, and then I am supposed to decrease. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to knit those 13. I do knit both continental and English style. I may be jumping back and forth with those. If there's a part that I think there might be a big difference between how you work the different styles, I'll point that out, but I just wanted to let you know that I may jump back and forth. And so I'm going to work 13 stitches here, and that is going to be up to 1 stitch before my marked stitch. So my marked stitch is 15, then there's going to be 1 stitch, and this is where I end at 13. So this is 15, 14, this is 13. So okay, how we do this decrease. So the decrease we're going to use on this sweater is a slip 2 together knitwise, knit 1, pass slip stitch over. So the first thing we do is work to 1 stitch before the marked stitch. This is our marked stitch, this is 1 stitch. We worked up till there. And then we want to insert the right needle into the 2 stitches on the left needle as if to knit and slip them onto the right needle. So let me get a little bit closer for you again. Oops, thank you for your patience. There you go. So we are going to insert our right needle into these 2 stitches as if to knit, like we're going to knit them together, but we're not. We're just going to slip them onto the left needle like that. Then we are going to work the next stitch, a knit 1. And then we are going to reach over to the right needle and we're going to grab those 2 stitches that we slipped. We're going to grab them in the front and we're going to lift them over the stitch that we knit. And there we have it. That's our first decrease. The next thing that we are going to want to do is we are going to take our marker and remove it, and we are going to replace it on this stitch that we just worked. So there you go. Whoops. Maybe easier said than done. Yeah, we'll just replace it like this. Lock that stitch up, and there we go. So this one is now marked, the one that we just made. Then my next instruction says to knit 34. So I am going to start knitting. I'm going to pause the video for a minute and you will join me back when I'm ready to do the next decrease. So I worked my next 34 stitches. I start counting from the stitch that I marked, that I decreased before, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17. I slip the middle marker, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32, 34. Knitting those 34 stitches brings me to 1 stitch before the marked stitch, and I'm ready to do another decrease. So what I will do is I will slip these both as if to knit onto my right needle. I will knit the next stitch. I will take my left needle and I will put it in the front of the 2 stitches that I slipped, and I will lift them over that knit stitch, and that made my decrease. And as a matter of fact, I got rid of 2 stitches by doing this. This is called a double decrease. So at that point, it's 2 less stitches. So I'm going to take off my marker and I'm going to put it back onto this stitch that I just worked. And then I am ready to work the last 13 stitches of the row, and I'm going to work to the end. And so this is, I just finished the first right side row. During this project, all the right side rows are going to be odd numbered rows, and all the even numbered rows are going to be wrong side rows. At this point, I want to place a marker to help me see which my right side is. That's going to be very important. The whole thing is symmetrical, but it's just good to keep track of what your right side and your wrong side is. So at this point, I have my first row completed, and I am going to take a special marker, and in this case I'm going to take a locking marker and I'm going to put a special little bead on it, on the end of it, and I am going to actually hang it off a stitch on my right side. So right now my working yarn is on the left side. I just finished this whole row, and I'm going to take this marker with this marker with a special marker on it, and I am just going to put it through one stitch on the front and just hang it off there. And so from now on, whenever I see this stitch hanging from the front, I know I am on the right side. So as I turn to go to do the wrong side, my marker is actually hanging off the other side over here. So all of the wrong side rows you can do as all knit stitches all the way across. There are no decreases or increases on the wrong side. One thing that you can do as kind of a little embellishment of the sweater is to work the marked stitch as a purl stitch on the wrong side, and that gives you a more prominent ridge at the decreases. And let me show you an example of that. So this is a sweater that I have in process. This is what your baby surprise jacket will look like when the knitting is done and before you sew it together. You can notice here, and I will focus in a little bit more on this for you, that I have purled this marked stitch on the wrong side to make the knit stitch prominent on the public side. So this is just a nice little embellishment that you can do. You do not have to do it, but you can do it. So in my case, I do want to do that. So now on the wrong side, I know that I'm going to knit most of the stitches. So we'll just do this first little business here. It's going to be knitting 13 stitches, and this makes it garter stitch because most of every row is done with a knit stitch. And so that's knit on one side, knit on the other side. That gives you garter stitch. And so I'm doing 13 stitches here. That's 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And you will see here that this is my marked stitch. So if I want that prominent stitch, instead of knitting this stitch, I'm going to go ahead and purl it instead. And then I will go ahead and knit another 34. And when I get to my marked stitch here again, I will purl it, and then I will knit to the end. And that is a wrong side row. So you've cast it on, you've worked your first decrease, you placed your markers. So now for a little while you are going to continue to do decreases until you get to the section where you will be adding some stitches to make the sleeves a little fuller. Right now you are actually working on the cuffs of the sweater. So let me show you this. So as I said, this is my finished piece. So you are actually working right now the cuffs of the sweater here and here. Those are your first stitches before the marked stitch. And then you are going to be working across the back and then you are coming over here, and you are, after you work the back, you're actually working the cuff stitches here. So after you do some decreases here, then you are going to add some stitches to just make this cuff a little bit fuller, and you are going to do that on the cuff sections, not on the back. So I will leave you here, and the next section will cover doing those increases for the sleeves and continuing to do the sleeves and the upper back. So I will see you then. Look for my next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.